According to the Russian Ministry of Economic Development, food inflation in February 2025 reached 11.5%, setting a new record since November 2022. The pace of price increases is measured in double-digit percentages. In 2024 alone, potato prices surged by 90.5%, while butter rose by 35%. A survey conducted by the Levada Center found that 63% of Russians consider rising prices their biggest concern.
A significant spike in so-called inflation for the poor suggests that the living standards of lower-income Russians have declined far more than official statistics indicate, the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting reports. While Росстат reports that real pensions decreased only 0.8% in 2024, adjusting for inflation for the poor shows an actual decline of around 6%, marking a record drop since the first months of the war. Росстат also claims that Russians' real incomes grew by 4.1% in the fourth quarter of 2024. However, when measured against inflation for the poor, real living standards have actually fallen by about 1% year-over-year, writes the Moscow Times.
At the same time, more and more Russians are turning to loans, and an increasing number of borrowers are unable to repay their debts. As of December 2024, the total accrued interest owed by Russian citizens exceed 600 billion rubles.
Это просто факт, что кредитная нагрузка.
It's a fact that household debt has been rising at an astonishing rate in recent years. Russians are trying to keep up with loan payments, often cutting back on other expenses just to pay the banks. But the debt burden has grown significantly, putting immense pressure on family budgets. If the economic situation worsens, if economic growth slows and incomes stagnate, repaying these loans will become even more difficult, potentially triggering a full-scale crisis.
Experts warn that Russia's massive budget allocations to its military-industrial complex at the cost of education, healthcare and infrastructure are pushing the country deeper into stagflation. Despite this, Vladimir Putin has no intention of ending the war. However, analysts at the Institute for the Study of War note that growing economic hardship is leading more Russians to question the need for a prolonged military campaign. At the same time, the huge losses suffered by the Russian army since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine have worsened the country's already severe demographic crisis. Mass mobilization and emigration have led to a labor shortage and wage inflation, which in turn is further driving up prices.
Birth rates are plummeting. In 2023, 3% fewer children were born than in 2022. In 2024, the decline accelerated to 3.4% compared to 2023. On top of this, Russia is facing a decline in the quality of its human capital and its ability to replenish it. The reasons are well known: the impact of war, the outflow of skilled and educated professionals from Russia, including university faculty, and the fact that European and other universities have closed their doors to Russian students. Maxim Blunt, economic analyst for Radio Liberty.
By launching its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia not only became an international pariah, but also topped the global ranking of sanctioned countries. One of the consequences of this isolation has been a shift in trade patterns. China's share in Russia's economy has now surpassed the pre-war combined share of all 27 EU countries. Russia has become critically dependent on China's economic stability and Beijing's political stance. At the same time, Ukraine's Western allies show no sign of easing sanctions. According to Bloomberg, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will ask Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for help in tightening enforcement of sanctions against Russia.
The EU is keen to intensify the enforcement of sanctions on Russia, said the official, adding that Russia's war in Ukraine threatens India as much as Europe. India could play an important role to end the war in Ukraine and ensure lasting peace. Bloomberg publication, citing an EU official on condition of anonymity.
The European Union is also considering confiscating frozen Russian assets, a step beyond simply keeping them locked, Political reports. UK Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs David Lammy has stated that Europe must move from merely freezing Russian assets to seizing them outright. An estimated 260 billion euros in Russian assets have been frozen worldwide, with the bulk, approximately 210 billion euros, held within the European Union. Reported by Katerina Bastun, Yulia Granovska, UATV News.
Russia, whose economy has been fully mobilized for war, is now spending more on defense than all European nations combined, including the United Kingdom. These findings come from the military balance report conducted by the UK-based International Institute for Strategic Studies. Russia's total defense expenditures have surged by 42%, reaching 13 trillion rubles, equivalent to $462 billion. In comparison, the combined defense budgets of European nations, including the UK and EU member states, increased by nearly 12% last year, falling $5 billion short of Moscow's military spending.
A study conducted by a Harvard Kennedy School analyst in collaboration with J.P. Morgan and other investment banks revealed that under pressure from the military lobby, Russia's defense industry has received nearly $300 billion in loans from the banking system, loans it is unable to repay. This means either banks go bankrupt or someone has to cover these losses. The burden falls on either the central bank or the Ministry of Finance, which leads to inflation.
Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War point out that the Kremlin is prolonging an information campaign to obscure the negative effects of the war in Ukraine on Russia's economy. Experts note that Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin recently claimed in a meeting with Putin that Russia's GDP has reached a historic high, growing by 4%, while inflation for 2024 stood at nearly 10%. However, analysts argue these figures are significantly understated.
Russia's true inflation is quite higher than the official statistics the Kremlin is willing to publicize, however. Several studies indicate that Russia's inflation rate is closer to 20%. Ms. Houston and Putin notably did not mention how the Russian central bank raised the interest rate to 21% in October 2024, or how Russia has been drawing from its National Welfare Fund to finance its war effort over the last 3 years. The liquidity portion of Russia's National Welfare Fund may run out by fall 2025. From a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
Experts forecast that in 2025 Russia's military expenditures will increase by more than 13%, reaching 15.6 trillion rubles. Despite the strain on its economy, Russia remains capable of sustaining such high wartime expenditures, the IISS notes. However, Russia's budget deficit has skyrocketed, growing 14 times larger compared to January last year due to a sharp rise in spending that has already surpassed the annual target, reports the Moscow Times.
In January, expenditures, according to preliminary estimates, were higher than revenues by 1,710 billion rubles, or 0.8% of GDP, compared with the budgeted deficit for the year of 1,170 billion rubles, or 0.5% of GDP. A year ago in January, the budget was implemented with a deficit of 124 billion rubles, from the Moscow Times publication.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the country's annual budget deficit has consistently exceeded 3 trillion rubles, around 2% of GDP. The Russian Ministry of Finance has attempted to cover this gap through domestic borrowing and by withdrawals from the National Wealth Fund, whose available reserves have already been reduced by 2/3.
Gazprom's economy is deflating. along with enterprises that cannot cover their losses. They will be bailed out using the state budget and the central bank. This means taking money out of Russians' pockets and redirecting it to enterprises that cannot repay their loans. These companies are being rescued, allowing them to continue living lavishly.
Эксперты отмечают, что европейцы могут столкнуться с серьезными вызовами в сфере безопасности, если Соединенные Штаты сократят поддержку Украины и Европы. Президент США Дональд Трамп неоднократно заявлял, что страны Европы должны увеличить свои оборонные расходы до 5% ВВП. Сейчас они не дотягивают до 2%. Генеральный секретарь НАТО Марк Рютте считает, что европейские расходы на оборону должны вырасти до 3%. Виктория Смирнова для телеканала Freedom.
Reported by Serhiy Kulias, Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.